Okay, welcome to Artcasters episode 308. And today we have guest Lora Innes with us, who we'll get to in just a moment. We're excited. This is going to be a really good show, so I'm glad we've already got a few people with us. It'll be fun. Let's do some plugs real quick at the start. You can find my stuff at corykerr.com. And if you want to see some animation or illustration or comic work, that's all there. Right now I'm in the middle of a project, and so I'll be posting little bits and pieces of stuff on Instagram and a little bit on Twitter. And so if you want to follow along, I think I'm going to try to do about one video a week on YouTube as well. And so you're on my YouTube channel, so thumbs up, like, all that thing, and follow along if you're interested in that. Josh, where can we find your stuff?
So my first graphic novel, Two Stories, book one, is available basically bookstores everywhere online. And you can still get it for a pretty reduced rate at Amazon. But if you want to order and support your local comic shops, I'd encourage you to go there. It's a comic about journey in discussing mental illness, and basically flashes back and forth from like adulthood to like these childhood sequences where it talks about like playground politics and cosplaying as Indiana Jones for an entire year. Autobiographical. So there's that. And then also I just heard back from Graphic Mundi, my publisher for Jacob's Apartment, which is my graphic novel coming out in May. And I should be having galleys, like I don't even think it's galleys. It's like the press previews or whatever shipped to me pretty soon. So I'll have a physical book to show you guys probably by like next Artcasters. But you guys should pre-order that as well. So yeah, that's my stuff.
Cool. And Scott, where can we find your stuff?
You can find my videos on how to make comics. I have a series called Making Comics 101 on my YouTube channel, Serkworks on YouTube. And it's basically, I would say, and if anyone wants to prove me wrong, I'm open to the challenge, but I'd say it's the most comprehensive course on how to make comics for free that you're going to find on YouTube. So definitely check that out. Also, you can go to my website, serkworks.com, where you can buy digital products that'll help you create comics, brushes, templates, bundles of all kinds of cool stuff to help you make comics. So definitely check that out. Oh, and one other thing, and I keep forgetting to mention this, but Frank, who is in the chat, well, actually, this came from Captain Goggles, who I think Frank may know, I don't know, but he sent me this really cool package of like mini comics and stickers, and I guess this is Cory as a mech. He sent me some Cory mech stickers. All DIY, very cool. But yeah, I got these the week that I had COVID, and I was going to show them off, and then I forgot, and then that didn't happen. But yeah, I just got some really cool stuff, so I just wanted to show that stuff off.
Oh, that's cool.
That's rad.
That's really cool. And Lora, I'll kind of do a little introduction, but do you have anything that you want to plug real quick, or?
You can find me on Twitter at Lora Innes on Twitter, or LoraInnes.com is my art portfolio site. I have an Instagram. I haven't posted in like over a year. It's been like a major source of anxiety. So if you want to see old art and like failed attempts to kickstart that thing, you could check it out. But if you care about anything recent, check me out on Twitter instead.
That sounds good. I'm considering abandoning Instagram and starting to post more to Behance or something because I'm so sick of Instagram. But
I'd go on there and I wouldn't be inspired. It would just make me really anxious. Like I just get so distracted by how awesome everyone is and how different it all is. And I'm like, well, maybe I should try that. Maybe I should try that. And I just, with everything going on in pandemic, I'm like, this is one source of anxiety I do not need in my life. I'm employed. I don't need work. I'm just going to turn it off and maybe pick it up in the future.
Well, you're missing a lot of people dancing to stupid music. I think that's the main thing.
On Behance?
On Instagram.
Oh.
Instagram. Yeah. Instagram is trying to be TikTok and doing it poorly, and I don't know.
Yeah, maybe I shouldn't feel too bad about not posting on Instagram. I don't know. I keep saying I need to get back to it, but I don't know, Laura. I mean, I feel I guess if I could do it in a way where I could post stuff and not just like endlessly scroll, but I don't know. It's
you can post from your desktop now, but
I know, and people have told me that. But then here's the other thing. Some of the guys in the industry I admire the most have like no or virtually no social media presence. Right. And I'm like, if I can get to that point, I think I'm ready for it. Because I was like early internet, right? Like I was doing webcomics in 2007. Mm-hmm. And so I was podcasting in like 2008 or 9. And so I like got that out of my system and I'm kind of like enjoying just like having work and then in my free time, like being creative, but I don't need to like dance for it anymore. Yeah. So, I don't know. It was just a very bad fit for my personality type. So.
Oh, I keep saying if the day I have to do a dumb dance and point at text on the screen to make money, I'm going to become an accountant or something. Anyway. I agree. Okay. So real quick, I think I first, and we were talking before, I'm staying at my parents' house right now. And they have a very musical dryer. Okay.
I have that same dryer. I literally thought it was me.
At least it's done now. I have like a whole studio and everything. And then doing this show from my parents' living room is interesting. But anyway, but the weather's a lot nicer in California than it is in Idaho. So, but yeah, so I came across you and you're doing a podcast way back when. And then you had the Dreamer going on. And then I watched as you did a number of things. Anyway, Winona Earp was awesome and all kinds of stuff. And then I saw you start to mention things on Twitter about like applying for jobs and stuff like that. And you started to get into different things. And I even remember you mentioning at one point that you're like, I just opened up my Word document resume that I haven't opened in like 7 years or something. Anyway, you and Chris were having kind of this back and forth and everything. And it was fun to watch all that. And then you transitioned over and started doing storyboards. And I kind of lost track a little bit. And then Invincible, which is, this is where this comes full circle for me. You and Chris mentioned Invincible and you're like, it's still going. And so you're not too late to catch up. Anyway, that was the first I'd heard of that comic. I jumped in, like, that is an amazing comic. And so I've been following that forever. And I've hung out with Ryan Otley and stuff since then because of that. And then come full circle, you're doing the storyboards for the Invincible cartoon. And I was like, oh, okay. So I have no real question or anything, but I just want to know, kind of just what did you find like was transferable or helpful? What was not relatable? Because a lot of people from the outside would be like, here's drawings in a box and there's drawings in a box, right. And, but I'm sure that there's a lot that you have to consider that you didn't consider before, but I'm sure that there's also a lot that you're like, oh man, I am so much more prepared for this because I've done all these comics.
Yeah. All of that's true.
Okay. So tell me how that was. Like, what is it like getting into doing storyboards coming from comics?
Yeah, it was kind of wild. Justin Copeland, who I used to podcast with, and flash forward, we're podcasting together again soon. It would be dropping in the spring, I think. He was a comics guy who was also a storyboard artist when I met him, moved up through the ranks directing. And he had always, like, for as long as I've known him, been trying to get me into animation. I was like, no, I'm like, I do comics. I'm an independent comic creator. I have my own comic. Like, this is what I want to do. And, I don't know how much you want to get into the violin playing part of my story, but I got real burned on comics and reached a point where I just, like, it wasn't even good for my mental health. Like, I was supposedly doing it because I loved it, but when I finally was honest saying I don't love this, it was like a game changer when I gave myself permission to say this was what it was in my life. Maybe in the future I will come back to it, but I'm gonna put it aside for now and do something different. And I think it really was like me looking at where I was at and me looking at my peers and feeling like I took this as far as I could. I gave it everything I got. This is probably what it's going to be till the end. It might get a little bigger, whatever. But flash forward 10 years, 15 years, like, what's my body going to be like? It's already breaking down. Comics is intense. You know, what's my mental health going to be like? What's my bank account going to look like? Like all of those things were feeling a lot more real than they did in my 20s. And I just gave myself permission to say, you know what, like I'm going to try something else. So I asked Justin about it. I was like, hey, you know, you're always trying to get me into animation. Like, I think I'm ready to get into animation. And he was at WB at the time. And it was like a very strange rainy day in California. I remember that because I lived in San Diego at the time. And he's like, hold on, let me go outside. So we were both outside in the rain, like talking, like what a weird day. But he sent me over a like a test, like a scene from a movie he was directing. And I didn't even know Storyboard Pro. Like I knew nothing. So it was only like a 2-page handout, a 3-page handout or something. It was pretty small. But I had no knowledge of anything. I had a script and he was like, do this in Storyboard Pro. There are tutorials on the website. Good luck. So I was just like in over my head. And I started to look at the script. I was like, I don't even know where to start with this. Like, I don't even know how to thumbnail it. I can kind of see it in my head because you do that in comics too. At least I do. Like a comic in my head when I'm drawing it and writing it is always a movie anyway. But then I just have to break it down to like the 6 images that tell that scene best and limit it to that. And so I could see it play out, but I didn't have the tools in my toolbox to really understand shot direction, like shot choice, screen direction, things like that. And Justin's just like, bless him. He just threw me in the deep end of the pool. He's like, just go like wide shot, medium, close up, close up to the end of the scene. And I'm like, okay, that's great. So I wound up just being like, I need to figure out this software before I like go into my official test, and took a sound clip from the Adventure Zone podcast. I'm a huge fan. And took a clip from there that was very cinematic and made me laugh and made you feel and all of that. And did an entire board. I built like a Kit Bash set on SketchUp because I knew that Justin worked in SketchUp a lot on his boards for Marvel and WB. And I sent him my test that before I went to the Batman thing. And he was like, okay, I'll give you notes. And then he never had time. So I have another friend, Meg Lloyd, who at the time she was at DreamWorks, and she was also a huge The Adventure Zone fan. We'd gone to live shows together and all of that. So I swear I owe my career to those 2 people. She took an hour on a Saturday, took my board down on Zoom or whatever we were using back then, and just screen shared and was like, you don't understand the 180 rule. You don't understand screen direction, and you don't understand like characters having the side of their screen. And she basically was like, this is a scene of, it's like, it ended in a kiss. And she's like, these characters are separated. They're finally reunited. Left is Taco side, right is Kravitz side. When they kiss, they meet in the middle. That one rule has like helped me understand what the 180 rule is more than anything else.
That is so well put, because the line of action is crazy hard to figure out. Like,
yes.
It's so specific to film, although it improves your sequential work too, you know?
Yes, it does. But now when I look at comics, I see that all the time, and I'm like, oh, comics could do this so much better than we do.
Yeah. Yeah, or you watch like a really badly edited film and you're like, that's why it feels like I can't keep track of time, because they're crossing the line. You can't cross the line.
I was just talking about that yesterday on some of those like, you know, TV shows where it's like, you know, just like an NBC show of the week or whatever. Mm-hmm. And they just set up a bunch of cams and they get back in the editing bay and make something out of it. And it's like every once in a while, a character who was on the left is all of a sudden on the right, or they cross the 180. And it's just like, oh, we like this take better, but there's not a consistency to it. It drives me absolutely insane now. And in animation, you don't just set up a camera, you're always drawing your camera. And so it's never an accident. Like it's always an intentional choice. So I feel like we're even more aware of those things than some live action directors are. And I think that animation is so much more intentional about it. And because of that, a lot of animation is very, very clear when it's done well. Yeah.
Well, you almost have to be, because there's so much like nuance in the human face and body language, and like, I mean, over 70% of our communication is nonverbal and everything. And so when you're when you're removing that and turning it into just these flat 2D shapes that we're supposed to interpret as people and animals and whatever, like you need a lot of that language to like carry through.
Yeah, and a world that's not real. You know what I mean? Like it's you're inventing a world, and especially in 2D where there's not a 3D set you're shooting on, you know, to really anchor all of that in a space that doesn't exist, I think is really more important for sure. Yeah,
I
think that was
about what you mentioned, and you don't have to get into detail if you don't want to, but was it comics itself, or was it the comics industry that kind of burnt you out?
Yeah, I was curious about that too.
Sure. It was both. It was 100% the industry. But also in independent comics, like the magic of it, right, is that it's all you. But then the dark side of it is it's all you.
That's so true. That's like the dark horror. Like, see, I'm still stuck with the addiction of it. So I'm still like, I do my day gig that covers the bills, and then I'm making these weird indie comics by night. But when you described what you, like I think anybody who's like at all seasoned or at least like jumped into the pool of comics, if you meet a comic creator who's like, yeah, I burnt out, I'm sick of it, I wanted a steady paycheck and to do creative but with a team or something instead of me carrying the whole thing. Like anyone who's done it would be like, oh yeah, I mean that makes sense. Like it's not unfathomable. You know?
No, because it's not just the creative bits, and like those are the fun parts. But then it's also like marketing and accounting and publishing and printing and so many other like insane things that you never thought about when you were like, I just want to make comics.
Oh yeah, okay, so you spend like a half a decade on a book, right? And then you're like, it's out, and then it's like, okay, now I have to convince a bunch of people who could give two craps about it, like to buy it.
Yes.
You know, and then it's like, you know, inevitably, like even the successes feel like disappointments, like the pitch process.
Yes.
Like you're going through, even when you get a win, there's like 10 rejections before the win. There's a lot about comics that are. I can understand getting burnt out.
That was a piece of it that really ruined it for me. You know, the full story on The Dreamer is that, you know, it had kind of maxed out its audience through IDW. I am so grateful for IDW. I mean, they were fantastic for me, and it was wonderful that I never had to like come up with the money on the front end or anything like that. But I was also like a historical fiction teen romance story at IDW. It wasn't necessarily like the right fit for their audience. But before that, like when I started, there wasn't such a thing as Scholastic and graphics. It wasn't first, second, or anything. And then when that hit, that was where my audience was, but my book still looked like an old Image comic. It looked like a IDW comic. And so it was like, if I want to reach that market, I have to redo everything in that style, in that format. But now I'm looking at the last 8 years that I need to now redo all of that work. And I'm still only halfway done with the story. Yeah. And I found a literary agent, and she was helping me do it. But a part of that process was getting my rights back from IDW. And then we never were able to sell it if I wasn't willing to like condense it down to 3 volumes instead of 6, completely redraw everything and edit it from the start. And I was like, I just don't have the heart for it anymore. So volume 4, I think I have 20 pages out of 200 left to draw. That's it. And I have 180 pages just sitting unpublished on my hard drive. Like it's really heartbreaking. And volume 5 is like mostly written, you know, it's like, what a bummer that I never finished that. But at the same time, I've had to like give myself permission and walk away from it. Yeah. Because there had to be a point. I wasn't going to finish it at that rate. You know, like I didn't have the heart to go back into self-publishing or like to take on self-publishing when I was already burnt out, you know, after having a publisher for 8 years or whatever. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, like, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I've got a project that I did all the boards for. I designed and rigged all the characters, and it is ready to go. And yet it kind of the same thing. Like I moved on in my life, and I just got to the point where I was just like, it would feel like such a massive like reversal
Yeah.
And I would have to put so many things that are going well on hold to like
go
back to this thing. And I think the only reason I would go back to it is to like prove a point, but I don't know who I would be proving that point to.
Right.
So I think about it sometimes, but I mean,
the
sometimes
comic gods, Cory.
Yeah.
That's who you're proving it to. Like that's who we all honor.
I still have some fans out there who would love.
I was gonna say, yeah, if you got readers, because I know like with YouTube videos, it's like you know, you get requests like, oh, are you gonna do more of these videos? And I'm, I don't really. I'm kind of beyond that, and and it's just like, but there's people out there that are wanting it, so it's
I know, and that's who I'm sad.
You were into that period before Hamilton came out.
I know, right?
Like,
Hercules Mulligan is B's uncle, and then Lin-Manuel Miranda uses him as character, and it's like, it's no longer a spoiler that he's a real dude in the past when everybody is singing Hamilton. Like, it's not the same. Whatever. I knew Hercules Mulligan was cool like years before you read his biography, Lynn. Doesn't matter. You're still my hero. I love you. You did better.
Oh my gosh. I'm super intimidated looking at your work because I've mostly done like slice of life that's like thinly veiled autobio stuff and then straight autobio. And I just probably overdid it and like sort of did a pitch that was with my sister. That's a historical fiction script that she worked on, and it's about like two really famous authors, and it's a true story, but it's like it's one of those things when you stumble upon, you're like, nobody's written about this, like, and it's like gold. Yes. So I was like, yeah, I'll show this to my lit agent, and then I showed it to her, and she like instantly signed my sister. But then like we pitched it out, and it's like we got a deal, and I'm like, but I have to finish. so now I'm gonna have to bite off another like a 200 and something page literary graphic novel. I'm actually meeting about it on Thursday, and I'm like, when I look at the work you did on like the Dreamer and like the research and the thought and like the character designs and the costume, and I've never delved into that, but I'm a history nerd. I'm like really intimidated because that is like, again, I also totally could see how you could burn out on comics because it's like, that's not just a normal comic. Like there is so much depth to what you have to research to take on something like that.
I mean, that's the thing. If you write a historical fiction novel, you just say she sat down. If you have a historical fiction comic, what does a chair look like in the 18th century?
I'm totally there.
Everything they touch and interact with, you have to answer that question for an era in which there is not photography. So I spent thousands of dollars and so many hours of my time taking research trips. I've been to like every battle in the Revolutionary War. I've been to Colonial Williamsburg so much at one point, I think they recognized me. I've gotten like tours behind the scenes at half the sites at Boston. Like, it's been amazing. I used to have reenactors who would be like, I'm going to Ticonderoga this weekend. Do you want me to take pictures of anything? I'm like, hell yes, everything. They would just give me Flickr, like links to their Flickr albums. I would just download it all. So, I mean, it was cool. Like once I started doing it to develop a tribe and to have like, all of a sudden the guys I'm writing about, like they're historians, their biographers are my friends. They're giving me personal tours at historical societies. I mean, it was 100% a labor of love. You know, it wasn't for the comic. The comic, Bo Smith, who wrote Winona Earp, who created it, he was my mentor. Actually, when I met him, he sent me like a packet of comics in the mail, and like the Winona Earp comics were a part of that packet. So to actually get to draw, like fast forward, get to draw Winona Earp when the TV show finally came out. And there were several false starts with that. And I was like along for that whole ride. So when Sci-Fi and IDW finally developed it, it was like so satisfying. But yeah, like Bo, I remember him asking me, like, I had sent him some work when I was going from being a commercial illustrator and thinking about comics. And it was like, I mean, if I could even find them to send, to like share with you guys, because they're so bad. They were like Spider-Man pages, but they were like horrible. And he called me and he was like, Lora, like, the thing about Spider-Man is that there will always be someone out there who draws Spider-Man better than you. And it's not because they're a better artist than you. It's because all they want to do is draw Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And he was like, what do you want to draw? And I couldn't answer. Like, I had come out of art school where everything is an assignment. And then I had gone into commercial illustration where I'm drawing like Mattel toy package designs and SpongeBob SquarePants books, like licensed characters, no creativity there. And then all of a sudden it's like carte blanche. What makes you happy? You know, what makes you inspired? What's the story you want to tell? And I didn't have an answer. And The Dreamer became my answer to that question. And so, yeah, I can't be mad about historical fiction, but I will say this. I am like in between gigs right now, and I intentionally am leaving space until the next one starts. And I've been working on a novel a few years back, right before I got in animation. I took a research trip to Connecticut to research some of the characters in The Dreamer who I'd been getting more interested in, and found out like some really cool and crazy stuff that people don't talk about because women in history don't matter. And I'm on this break right now, and all of a sudden I am writing a novel about it. So it's kind of fun to like return to that era and then return to some of those characters that I really loved. But it's like straight historical fiction. There's no fantasy, and yeah, it's no drawing at all. So if she sits in a chair, she just sits in a chair, and the reader can just figure out like what that looks like in their own imagination. Or one day when it's adapted for TV, then there'll be a prop set designer and a historical consultant, and I will be none of those people.
Somebody else.
Great. That's the power of TV. That's why I love it so much. It's a team. It's not all on me. I get to do the piece that I love.
Yeah.
Do the piece I'm good at, and then other people fill in the gaps, and they're way better at those gaps than I will ever be.
You know, that's a really good point because, you know, like I work in a really small creative team, and it's like the souvenir industry, but I like art direct, a very small graphic design team and stuff. And it's like there's a difference between the feeling when you like are working on illustrations that are kind of passed around and everybody's like revising and it's like a team effort and you sort of get this like collective vision.
Yes.
And way more so in animation, right? Where it's like animation's like film in general, it's like amazing when you see all the cogs that like anything comes out like coherent. Honestly, it's like it's astounding that all the cogs work, but it's like,
and I mean, part of the cogs is production, producers. Yeah. They are so essential, and that's a big piece of it. I think when you're in like independent artist person, is having to handle all that business stuff, having to handle the timeline and scheduling and all of that. Having people that are naturally inclined and gifted at those things, and they are a piece of the team, like
sales and marketing teams, so you don't have to do your own sales and marketing. That's awesome.
It's wonderful.
It's a weird thing because it's like there's pluses and minuses, right? Like when you're working with a team, it's like you see this collective vision. When you're working on your own, it's like you have the opportunity, especially, I mean, you know this, but with your comics, it's like that's your full vision, like come to life. The downside of that is like, as artists, we tend to have like a very high expectation of ourselves. And so very rarely when you're working on like personal projects, is it ever going to reach that level? Like it's so true. It's like and I think that might be one of the things that keeps me in comics is like the fact that I never, like, I can get to the point where I fulfill a client. But I've never gotten to the point, like I've gotten close, or I've done like one or two pages where I'm like, yeah, that's it. Or made stories that I'm happy with, but I've never really quite, it's like every time I even reach a bar, it like raises, with like personal work. And I'm a terrible client. And I think we all are, like, especially indie cartoonists, like we're terrible clients to ourselves. Like, whereas like if you had a decent creative director, they'd just be like, that's good enough. Like, get it out, you know, like get it to the next guy.
A set schedule, right? Like when your chunk is due, it's not like this board could never be better. It's that I'm out of time and I need to move on to the next handout. And if there are changes, the revisionist gets that lovely little job. And if not, then sometimes it just has to ship. And that's so hard. It was like, that was one of the things that really helped me with The Dreamer, was being a webcomic, because I had a publishing date. And so it was like, it has to be done by Friday.
Yeah.
Because if not, you just noodle it forever and you just nitpick it all the time. And even then, when I like would go to ship a book to print, I would always still be like, okay, I'm like, these are the 40 things I'm going to like touch up and fix. And one time it was legitimate. One time because I had, at the Old South Meeting House in Boston, I had drawn this scene where Dr. Joseph Warren gives the 5th anniversary of the Boston Massacre speech, and he like, it's so crowded, he has to climb in through the window, and he's like super dramatic, so he does it in a toga. And so I like draw this whole scene. I draw the whole Old South Meeting House, and then the curator, I think she was the curator of the site, like posted and was like, "Thank you for featuring us. This is lovely." Except the British like completely destroyed the interior of Old South Meeting House during the siege of Boston, and this is rebuilt in the Federalist style. She, and then my friend who's Joseph Warren's biographer, he was like, I remember seeing a sketch of the interior of the original Old South Meeting House. She's like, I don't know if I've seen it. He's like, I have seen it in your archives. They dig it up and find it, and they send it to me, and I redrew it so it exists in print with the historically accurate interiors. That's how annoying I am for myself.
I wanna just really quickly, because I'm gonna be working on a historical fiction project. I want to say that is a particular thing of Lora, and because I'm going to be writing about well-known figures. Yeah, I mean, I have to draw some boats. Those boats may not be perfect to the
better get that rigging right. How many masts are there?
Yeah.
Oh
I mean,
my gosh.
But I'm excited about that, you know. Sorry, go ahead, Cory.
No, boat people are really intense. I have done some like tall ship illustrations and stuff.
Yes.
I'm just like, yeah, I'm making it up. Anyway, I mean, at one point in one of my comics, the tall ship that I drew was literally the Pequod from Moby Dick, and I raised it from the bottom of the ocean, and it's floating in the sky. And then some guy on Twitter is like, "You got the jib mast wrong thing," and I'm like, I don't know what words you're saying. Like, does the fact that it's like floating in the sky
doesn't
like,
matter?
I mean, that's not the part you have a problem with. You have you have a problem with the type of knot I tied in a rope.
Yes. Oh, I got the same thing. I drew the laces on the back of Beast's corset wrong. Some costumer was like, the crisscross lacing was popular in the 19th century. In the 18th, it would have been spiral bound.
Dude, okay. This is one of the cool things about film. Like, a lot of my close friends, especially the ones I like, we all went to art school and stuff. A lot of them ended up in like costume art for film, and like, I have never had the more interesting conversations about where seam lines are.
Yes.
Like where if you're doing costume illustration, it's like that's all of it is like, especially historical, where it's like, oh no, the seam line's like about half an inch higher during this era.
Yes.
And it was like double pleated or something, and you're like, what? Like it's so cool. But it's like it's an art of its own, like knowing all of that stuff. And I
was gonna say, when you don't get people doing this is after society has ended and everybody is being taken over by the robots. There's a particular draw to me doing stuff in the future because nobody can argue with my decisions.
That's right. Man, that costuming stuff, right? Not long after I moved to California, they had an exhibit of the Outlander comics up at in Beverly Hills. What's the name of the big TV museum there? I'm only blanking on it because I'm on the mic.
I have no idea.
Okay.
But go ahead.
They had an exhibit there, but like going to see that was phenomenal because it was so like the costuming on that show is so unreal because it's one part historically accurate, but then one part she's from the 1940s in one season, she's from the 60s in another season. And so they take elements of the era she lived in and puts them into her style of the dresses that she has made back in the 18th century. And it's like next level of like, oh my God, like I stan you guys so much. You're such an amazing team. This is all so like thoughtful and intentional. And of course, like the historical people are like that hemline or that top, whatever. And it's like, yeah, we very intentionally did that so that she does have elements of being a woman from the 1940s. Like, yeah,
right.
Goodbye.
That's awesome. Okay, so comics, and then you transition into storyboards. What was that? What was that like? What was different? What did you like? What did you not like? What did you notice that you took with you that was helpful?
Yeah, Justin had way more faith in me than myself. I will say after that conversation I had with Meg, where she taught me screen direction, I redid the whole board, and it was like night and day. Like even I could see the difference. Like it was so massive, and I was so ashamed of the first thing I had sent to Justin. But I think for him as a director, he looked at that and was like, I can work with her because she can take direction. Yeah. And he already knew that I could draw. And he's like, you can draw well and you can draw fast. Like, that's the thing comic people have for them. He's like, you also are a natural, not a natural, I put a lot of work into it. You're a storyteller. Like, you're a writer, you think like a writer, so you understand that what makes a scene, like what's the important element there. You are used to drawing expressions, camera angles, all that for comics. And so when he took over, he and his brother Chris Copeland took over Invincible, he was like, hey, do you want to come be my revisionist on Invincible? And I was like, is this
like? Did you just freak out at that point?
Oh yeah, I remember my husband and I were at the Lord Huron concert and the blues. What's the name of the House of Blues in San Diego? And we got in there like hella early, and we were just standing like right up front, so we were gonna have like front row seats when the concert started. And then Justin is texting me, and he texted me that, and then he sends me the like smiley with sunglasses emoji, and I just showed my phone to Mike, and he just went. And I wrote back, if you're not messing with me, I'm in. And he's like, let's do it. And I looked at my husband. I'm like, I guess we're moving to LA. I guess like that just happened. But yeah, oh my God. Invincible is like my favorite comic, that and Fables. So to like have a chance to work on it was like a no-brainer whatsoever to do that. And when I was still in San Diego before I moved up, they had me take on a couple scenes. I was doing cleanup. So it was like the opening sequence where the Mahler twins break into the White House, the whole thing with John Hamm, and that scene went on through a lot of changes, but that was the very first one I worked on. And one of the things that I got to do there that was really cool was just like getting a scene that the Copeland brothers had blocked out, and they had shot the backgrounds in SketchUp, and then just adding acting. And so like they had the poses and where the characters were standing, but I had to go in and then draw the expressions, the acting, the timing, and all of that. So that was my first time like really making something alive, because comics is like it moves, but it's flat on the page. And so that was like so much fun, so magical. And then the other sequence they gave me to clean up, like no pressure whatsoever, is the first time Mark flies. So that sequence that Justin boarded, like I wish I could share Justin's boards because I don't know, if you're in animation long enough, you know that sometimes the boards are so much more cool than the final animation. And it's like, oh my God, what Justin did with that scene was so freaking cool and so intense, and it kind of lost some of it whenever it made it into final animation. It's kind of a bummer. But yeah, I did cleans on those. And my very first like handout was over Zoom because they knew I wasn't up in LA yet. And I'm thinking Justin's going to like teach me how to do my job or anything. No, he's just like, hey, did you download the files? I was like, yeah. And he's like, okay, well, how fast do you think you can turn that around? I'm like, I don't know. He's like, okay, well, check in with me tomorrow and tell me where you're at. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, all right, bye.
I love it though, because like I do think there's this like weird perception, and I'm sure you can speak to this too, but it's like I remember before really doing like a published comic, feeling like I had hesitated for a long time because I'm like, well, you know, like at some point I'm gonna like unlock the door and then somebody's gonna go, your entryway, like walk through it. And I finally just came to the conclusion most cartoonists do, which is like, oh, if I'm gonna make a comic, that's the trick. You just make a comic. Like there's no right? No like magic, like, you know, Barnum's circus, like, you know, announcer who's going to be like, welcome to comics, you've entered. And I think it's very similar with like any industry where it's like, I've literally never had I've rarely had times where somebody's going to like stop and like go, okay, here's how you do this thing. Most often in creative, you're very often thrown in the deep end, and then it's like it really is just like, okay, well now I figured this out. And I don't know. It's also kind of fun when you get used to adapting to that, like the shock at first, because it's like, and I mean, you freelance for a long time too. It's like with freelance and art, it's like it can be actually pretty fun when you get to the point where you're like, okay, I can't do this. And then you're like, well, there was a time where somebody asked me to draw a stadium full of people, and I'd never drawn a crowd scene that large, and I've done that. There was a time where I was asked to do like a perspective I'd never drawn before, and I did that. So I can do this, you know. That's a cool place to be, but that's also really scary with storyboarding, and especially boarding for film. Had you boarded commercials or anything short?
Okay. Some commercials, but commercial boards are like nothing, and that was like,
they feel like cheating.
They feel like cheating. Yeah, that was like way back when I was drawing SpongeBob at that studio. We did some of that. Yeah, but nothing that compared. No. Yeah, wow. And it really is like you have to learn on the job, but there's not really time to teach you on the job.
Yeah.
There's just, I mean, I tell people this all the time, like, yes, you can figure out pretty quickly how to use Storyboard Pro. The tutorials are simple. You can go through them in an afternoon and you can be drawing and working in it. But that's not actually how any of us, I mean, technically it's how we use the program. But what we use the program to do is so much more than what you're going to get out of that tutorial. And it's not until you're actually inside the studio looking and working on real boards that you understand that. And I think one thing that has changed just since pandemic is so many animation people are now like work from home. They either have more time or, you know, in between gigs, we don't have commutes anymore and all of that. So many people are teaching online courses now. And so all of a sudden there is like real professionals who are the top of their game, showing you exactly what an action board looks like, showing you exactly what a comedy board looks like, showing you exactly how to break down a scene for feature. You know, this is no longer a mystery. And so I feel like that's one of the good things. Pandemic has done a lot of good things for animation, despite it being obviously horrible trauma that we're all still going through. But like within the industry, it has like opened some doors and like set some things in motion that I think are going to have a really long-term positive effect. And one of those is the barrier to entry. And that is going like through education, which is now changing because of the accessibility and the quality of online content that's being taught. And also we're all virtual now. Like I live 2 miles from Burbank and I haven't been in a studio in over 2 years. And I've worked at like 5 different animation studios since the pandemic started, I think. And I haven't been to any of them. I think I went down to Shadow Machine to pick up my computer in Hollywood with a mask on, and we wiped it down because that was during the era where we still sanitized everything because we had no clue. And I think that's about it. Everything else has just been like, or at WB when I dropped off my computer and I just drove to Tarzana and then pulled up in some dude's driveway, and then he's like, text me when you're here. And I texted him and the garage door came up, and then there was a table that was just like, put here. Put my laptop, my computer there, and then just drove away. It's just such a weird era. But because of that, you know, so many people have either returned to areas of the country that they would rather live, or getting work, you know, that they didn't have an opportunity to get before whenever the two were in-house. And so, what that's going to look like long-term, I'm excited to find out.
I hope it has.
It'll be interesting because the people who are managing everyone, they're like freaking out. But all the creatives are like, oh, this is great. I'm comfortable. You know, I can go make a sandwich if I want a sandwich. I'm still getting my work done. And all the bean counters are like, where is everybody? I can't see them. And anyway, it's pretty fascinating. You
haven't seen us for 2 years and we haven't dropped the ball. Like,
if I'm getting the work done, it's fine. You don't. I don't need to be, you know, whatever. Yeah.
That being said, though, you know, like talking about being a revisionist and learning on the job, there was something about it. Skybound. We were in this small studio in Sherman Oaks, and they called it the bullpen. And there was this like room in the back that was really lovely. It was like up on the 6th floor, and it was all glass windows. So you're like looking out over the Hollywood Hills every day. So it was very pretty, but we were all crammed back there together. And so it was like one of my directors was like looking over my shoulder at all times. And, you know, the revisionist had a little quad. We all sat together. There was it was too small to even have cubicles, anything. And so for me to go from like being self-employed, being work from home for a decade to being thrown in that environment, oh my God, it was such a transition, anxiety-wise.
Yeah.
But I was like, I will take this as a learning opportunity. And I just picked everyone's brain. Like I would ask questions all the time.
Mhm.
My buddy Jarrell, he's, well, maybe I can't spoil where he's at. He's doing something very cool at Sony right now. But he was a board artist on Invincible, and he sat next to me. And when he would get reviews, I was just like, hey, Jarrell, like, can I listen in on your reviews? Do you care? Because literally we're all going to hear it. It's one room. And so I would just go, like, the director would be on one shoulder and Laura would be on the other shoulder, just because, you know, it's one thing to hear them saying what's the note, but if you can't see the screen to connect the dot, it's another thing. But I just wanted to learn. I'm like, how do I do my job? And I just wanted to see, like, what are they changing? What is broken? How are they going to plus it? What are those suggestions? And all of that stuff that came out of being in a shared space, that energy, the who's listening to what.
Yeah.
Like, we were all working there when Into the Spider-Verse came out. And it was like, for the next month, we just had the soundtrack on repeat because we were so hyped about that movie. And it was so fun to be in that environment when that movie came out, you know, instead of just excited alone. So there is something I definitely miss, especially having started working at multiple companies since pandemic started. It's like, oh, the team, it can happen. It has happened, but it has required a lot of intentionality on the higher up leadership to prioritize that and value that. And some companies have, and some companies haven't at all. And I'm like, if this is the way it's going to be, I will pick that company that prioritizes that over like a slightly cooler gig every time. I've learned that now.
Yeah, there's an energy with there's an energy with like creating together with a group, and you know, if motivated properly, it can create this like I don't know, it's like a fire that just kind of like you can't get working on your own. Like and it's like it's not competitive. It's hard to explain. It's like slightly competitive, but it's not, and it's very much like you're all kind of lifting each other up. And
that's what I miss on Instagram. This is why I'm not on Instagram, because it to me it only feels competitive. But you know what? If it was my friend sitting next to me in the studio, it would get me so jazzed and so excited. It would be totally different. There's not likes, comments, whatever that is like going on that is like makes me feel small or makes someone else feel unattainable. It's just like, that dude eats lunch with me every day. And I know he's like super great at what he does, but he's also my friend. He's just a bro, and I can like approach him. I don't know. It takes a lot for me. But
and also you can kind of celebrate successes because you want killers on your team. Like
exactly.
Like if you're on a team, you want the people to succeed. So you're not like hoping for like weakness. You're hoping for everybody to have strength. You know?
When you're working on a show and there are other people who are like so much better and so much more experienced than you, to me, I eat that up. It's like, teach me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. I will sit at your feet. Like, what can I learn? I say that to all of my directors, like, especially when I was starting out, like, what are you fixing in my work? Where am I costing you time? And let me know. So, because if I'm making the same mistakes over and over again, like, please let me know so I can work on that and save you time and also be learning at the same time. And I remember when I was on Magic the Gathering the first time, when the Russo brothers had it, Yoriaki Mochizuki was the supervising director on the show that first time. And he was from Lego Movie. He was Into the Spider-Verse. He was on Final Space. And in my job interview with him, he was teaching me about film. And I was like, I just want this job to learn from this. And, you know, he came from feature. And so I would turn boards in, and then he would be like in his office reboarding everything. And there was one point when I went in and I was like, hey, Yuri, like, I just want to know, like, it seems like everything I turn in gets redone. And I don't mind that, but I just want to know, like, if I'm causing the studio, if I'm costing money and I am causing you time, late nights, time with your family, whatever. He's actually really good with boundaries. I respect him so much like that. But, you know, like, if I am costing work for you or any other part of the team, please let me know so I can improve. And he was like, oh, no. He's like, you're like one of the best boarders artists I've ever worked with, which is like, oh. He's like, you put things into your work that I hadn't thought of. And then that gives me an idea. And then I take what you did and I build on that. And in feature, it works more like that, where it's like we're all throwing ideas and we're just like refining and doing it over and doing it over and doing it over. Well, I had only come from TV, where it's like a script in 3 weeks to rough something out. And then at the end of the time, that's that. So if that 3 weeks is not well spent, like we got to reboard it all, there's problems. So it was a complete shift in my mindset that I hadn't done feature yet. But as soon as he said that to me, it's like, this makes total sense. And on that one occasion, he's like, come here, I'll show you what I did. And he walked me through the scene and he was like, you did this and it made me think that. And so I did this and here's how I played that out. And it was so cool to see. Like it was like
That's awesome.
A ping pong thing where we were both working on it and building it up into something that's even better. And that stuff, I think it's a lot harder to do when you're remote. You kind of miss some of that magic.
Yeah.
I've never actually had the ball pin thing, and I think it would be really cool.
Yeah, I went from Skybound to Warner Brothers, where it's like no windows, no one has the lights on, and we all have like 6-foot walls around our cubicle. And I was like, does anyone even know I work here? Like, this is so different. Like the whole time I was at Skybound, all I wanted was just a cubicle, and then I got one, and I was like, guys, I'm lonely. Guys, I miss you. I had a picture of all of us from like out at lunch at Skybound. I just like hung it up on my cube. Like I had friends once.
I went through DreamWorks one time, and it was like, there's parts of campus that are everybody's lit up and everyone's talking and stuff, and then there are departments where, like literally, as I'm walking through, people like start to whisper, and you walk in and the lights are off, and there's just people just hunched over in these beautifully decorated cubicles, but like it could be 1 a.m. with the janitors there,
right?
And you're like, and it's like, whoa, this is like
energy. Or
it's like this is, and you go from department to department, and you're like, okay, this is really interesting.
Yeah.
Like the story department, they're all like all bouncing all over the place, and then you get into like texture, and they're like, zoomed in, and they're all just moving sliders around, and I'm like, whoa, this is drastically. Anyway,
I was like back in a corner by color, and so color is like it must be pitch black, right?
Yeah,
so it was like I had to have not IT, but like the maintenance dudes come in and actually turn the light on above my desk, because I was like, I need to see a little bit, guys.
Yeah,
just a little bit back here, okay? I hope it doesn't mess with you colorfuls. Shut your door. You'll be fine. I'm tripping over my own stuff in my own office.
So what was one of your favorite scenes that you worked on in Invincible?
My favorite scenes
that you were able to work on? Yeah.
So when Mark gets his powers, that was mine. Justin, he was directing. Chris and Justin were directing episodes 1 and a couple other ones, I think. But they were working on 1, and he gave me handouts. So I was technically a revisionist, but I got to board. And that was super fun, just because it was like the first thing that was like mine, like that I did. And it was such a fun character moment. I mean, I remember it from the comics, and I put like my little like claim to fame is like in the comics when Mark throws the trash in the dumpster and all the flies come up, and he's like, oh my God, this is so gross. I put the flies on my board and they made it into animation. And I was like, yes, my Easter egg. I did that for you, Cory. But I remember like Justin being in Justin's office, like how, he's like pantomiming like how hard like it should be for Mark, the first one that he throws in when he's still a normal human. And as we're arguing about it, Cory Walker like walks out of his office and he's like, I think it should be like this. And Justin's kind of arguing with him. And I'm like, Cory Walker has spoken. We have our answer. Like, it will be like that. Thank you for weighing in. So that whole scene, and then the dinner scene afterwards, whenever Mark tells his parents he got powers, all of that was mine. So that was really fun. And the Albert the Alien scene, I always say Albert because my friend Trevor has a comic called Albert the Alien. Alan the Alien. Right. He and Trevor's alien is like an orange cone-headed alien. That's why I get them. So Alan the alien, whenever he and Mark are like on the moon, and he's like, "This is your Earth, right?" And he's like, "Earth," and they're doing the thing. When that scene dropped and people were like laughing about it on Twitter, I was like, they got it. Like I landed the humor, and I don't get humor a lot, but I really love to do it. And so that was really fun for me that it landed, it tracked. I really love that character, even though I can't remember his name. So yeah, that was another iconic one for me.
So I didn't realize Cory Walker was there. Were Ryan and were they involved as well? Like
Kirkman wrote a couple episodes. Ryan would pop in. I think he was a consultant, possibly an EP. I'm not sure. Kirkman's definitely an EP and owns the studio. And Cory Walker was our character designer on season 1. So yeah, he designed everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why it looks like an animated Cory Walker cartoon, because it's an animated Cory Walker. I mean, that's why the thing, it's like, it's written by Robert Kirkman and, you know, designed by Cory Walker. Like, what more? It's like the dream, right? Like, if you're going to adapt your work, that's the dream.
I was so worried because I love that comic so much. As soon as they announced it, I was like, oh, please don't ruin that. And then it came out. You started to see trailers and artwork from it, and you're like, oh, they're doing it for real. Like, they're really like, because there are so many things in the last 25 years where they like, you could tell the creators are kind of embarrassed of the source material, or they're kind of like, we're going to make this like filmic, you know, and they try to, and the Invincible cartoon is it's its own thing, and it does its own thing really well. Mm-hmm. But you can tell that like there's flies in the trash can, you know what I mean? And the artwork is the same. And so knowing that Cory Walker's involved in both of those is really, really cool, because you guys did such a great job at the vibe and everything. The story changes that happened made sense. Like just the different formats and things, like moving some of the events around and things like that. It was so good.
Yeah. It definitely is in the spirit of it. And the thing I love about it is, like, you know, whenever I heard that they were doing it animated instead of live action, is like, because of the gore, because of the mass, like, intergalactic, like, scale of everything. By doing it in 2D animation, the way that the comic is hand drawn, it's all exists within the same world. Like, as soon as you start having some elements that like are CG, some that are like, you know, on set, whatever, those things become apparent, even if it's really well done on a subconscious level. But by having it all drawn, everything is as real as everything else. And so I think the violence in that show lands so much more because it's 2D than if it were live action. And because the violence is like such a key element of both the comic and the TV show, you know, and crazy wild monsters and all of that, to have everything be just as believable as Mark's locker and his scene that he has in his bedroom. It all has the exact amount of tangibility because it's all 2D animation. I think that's an element of 2D animation that we take for granted, that we don't really think about the intensity of. Like, I think about like all of the Disney, the live action remakes. I know it's so easy to hate on them, and I will hate on it. But I think that like one thing that is missing is like, it's so believable. Like my mind can detach that Belle can fall in love with a beast and it's not weird because the same rules apply, or that a mermaid exists in the same world as a talking crab. Like, because it's all cartoon, like it's all as fake as everything else, but also it's all as real as everything else. And that's the piece of it that I think is like drew me in. I mean, hooked me as a child and made me want to be an animator. I mean, there was just such magic in that. And I mean, there have been a few CG movies, like animated movies, that have made me feel that way, but not as many as 2D. I feel like 2D has an emotional hook because I get lost in the world more for those reasons.
Yeah.
I agree, and that's why everybody should hand letter and hand ink all of their comics. Because
oh God, if I could have hand lettered, bless the people who hand letter. It's so beautiful.
Josh hand letter stuff, and I want to finish.
I didn't hand letter the thing coming out of May though, so.
Yeah. Okay. We have a question from the chat. So
Sure.
Laura mentioned Bo Smith as a mentor, and he's such a sweet guy, and the creator of Winona Earp. When Winona came out, what was your experience with the Earper fandom?
Yeah.
I love you. I had spent, how long was I in comics before that? 8 years, 9, 10. I don't know. I had been in comics for a while, and I had done, I don't know, you go to Comic Cons, and it's a lot of like tired old white guys. And they have like their carts of all of their like Silver Age, Golden Age comics that they need signed, or like this booth or that booth. And there is like, oh, Korean finger hearts. There was like a tiredness to it where it's like there wasn't a celebration. It's like we're here to just like nitpick because this movie isn't everything we wanted it to be, or this summer crossover should have been that. And it's like everyone.
When you wrote The Dreamer, Laura. No, I'm just kidding.
I had someone come up to me at a convention once and was like, "Oh, you make this?" And I was like, "Oh yeah." She's like, "The blah 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 is historically accurate and blah 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 this, and I hate it. It's trash." And she walked away, and I like about had a panic attack. I was also exhausted, and I hadn't eaten in like 14 hours. But I mean, there was like I started then doing anime conventions, and they had a lot fresher energy. It was a younger crowd.
Yep,
they're all excited. It's all about not like, can I stand in the line of either this like famous celebrity or this comic book creator from who's huge and get my thing signed or whatever. It was like, if I can find the thing no one has discovered yet, I will be the coolest person at this con. So everybody is like, I've never heard of this. Great, tell me about it. Like there was no barrier to entry whatsoever. So I was really doing like more anime conventions because of that. But when the Erber scene happened, my friend Beth Brockhouse, she had been my roommate in college. When Winona came out and I watched the pilot, because I had to draw the comic before I even saw the TV show. Like if I showed you the PDF of reference IDWs like Sci-Fi sent over, it's like laughable. I was scouring the internet for pictures of like Melanie Scrofano, and there was like nothing. There was like a couple modeling pics, and like, I mean, I had like nothing to work off. It was so bad. And then
what was the timeline as far as?
Oh, how long before? I think about 6 months.
Yeah. Were they launching the comic at the same time as the show?
Mm-hmm.
Or
yeah. Okay. So they were making the show. So I had a couple set photos, and that was like it. And yeah, so like Chris Ivanhoe, who took over the comic after me, he had the like show, he had the tone, he had like all the actors' faces, and his work is so much better than mine. And all the reviewers are like, "Oh, he's so much better than Laura." I'm like, I know he is. I can't hate him. I love him, but also like he has a lot more tools in his belt than me.
Yeah, it's like comparing somebody doing like the concept work for Star Wars before Star Wars to the people who like get to do it after, built on the stuff that was Yeah.
Good luck finding pictures of Mark Hamill before he's Mark Hamill.
Yeah, exactly.
Harrison Ford, right? Like that's what I had to work with. Now they're huge and they're everywhere. And Melanie
I've got a book
the most beautiful nose.
I've got a book full of boards from the original Star Wars, and before they developed what C-3PO looked like, he is the weirdest sex doll looking.
Yes,
creepy.
It's not good.
There's something great about that early concept art, though. I love it.
He literally just has a circle for a mouth, and it's like everything wrong about everything in that.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's unsettling.
Old school Darth is great. Like Darth Vader. Darth Vader when he was way more samurai.
Oh, and he constantly looks like he's screaming. Like the shape of his mask isn't a triangle; it's just always this open anime scream.
That's why development is so important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But no, the Earpers were like. Just to answer her question, Beth invited me or like made me aware of Klexicon, and that some of the cast was going to be there. And I was like, do you think I should go? And she's like, I definitely think you should go. She's like, if you go, I'll go with you. I'm like, well, I could drive to Vegas. All right, let's do this. It was the most intimate, sweet, beautiful convention experience I'd ever had. Like,
oh wow,
it was an LGBTQ representation and entertainment con. Winona Earp was like a big piece of that. The people who were there were so excited to like come together. It felt like a family reunion. I have never felt more safe at a convention. I never felt like I had my guard down as much. I never felt as like supported, and I never felt like the fans were like so excited and so like there for the thing that they loved in a way that it's like, why aren't we always there for the things that we love? And you know, it put into sharp contrast like everything that was missing from like the other cons I was attending. And I'm like, I'm sold on these ERP cons because I just love these people and they welcome me with open arms. And Tim Rozon, who plays Doc Holliday in the show, I met him at the premiere in San Diego, and he's like a huge comic book nerd. And he he came up to me and was like, how do you make comics? And I was like, I don't know. How do you act? He's like, no, like, how do you break into making comics? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I guess like acting, like you fake it till you make it. He's like, no, like, what are the steps? Like, you are living my dream. How do I live the dream? Like, he was acting like I was the TV star. I'm like, no, you're the really hot guy who's like on TV and you're being really nice to me. And yeah, it just, he was so excited because he's such a huge comic book nerd. He was so excited about being in a comic that he like got the cast excited, like, guys, we're comic book characters now. Like, you don't understand. They're like, okay. And he got the fans excited. And so I feel like a huge piece of me being so embraced by the Winona Earp fandom was the fact that Tim was so vocal in embracing the comic book as a piece of the show, like It was all the same thing. Because like, you know, they did like Buffy season 8 as a comic book. I feel like those things were never embraced with the same passion because I haven't seen like where the cast has like promoted it in such a way as the way that like the cast of Winona Earp promoted our books. And it just was really wonderful. I feel very grateful for them to do that for me. And yeah, Earpers are lovely. I love them for life. Happy to count myself as one of them.
That's awesome. Well, that's cool. Yeah, I want to keep asking you all kinds of questions, but we're a little over an hour. Do you want to wrap or you want to keep going for?
You can ask me more. I'm literally just sitting in my house on a Thursday night. Same thing I've done for the last 6 weeks. I just write my novel, try to like decipher 18th century handwriting, and you know, go to bed.
Is that from the research that you're doing? 18th century handwriting? Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. There's part of one of the communities I'm in, trying to teach kids how to look at like genealogical records, and it's funny because you get them in there and you get a computer in front of them and they pull up, you know, like an 18th century death certificate that's written by some priest, you know, and they're like, they haven't taught us cursive in school. And we're like, oh
my gosh.
So it's like,
I mean, I read cursive and it's still so hard. It's still so hard. I literally so when I went to Connecticut to do this research, I have a friend who is really into genealogies, like that you say that. Yeah. And he was the one who helped me like start to discover a bunch of this. So when I took that trip, I'm like, Sean, you're coming to Hartford with me. We're on this ride together. We got this creepy Airbnb in Ashford, Connecticut. He has like the charm person spell as a person, his personality. Like people meet this guy and love him. I met him via Twitter, and like now I'm just like sharing a room with him in Airbnb. I mean, that's how safe I feel with this guy. And he like can talk anyone to anything because he's so freaking sweet and lovable. And he like Thomas Knowlton's farm is now owned by these Boy Scouts. I used to drive by it on every trip to New England. Like, how do I get into this Boy Scout camp? How do I get to Tom Knowlton's farm? Sean just like emails the camp directors like, I used to be a Boy Scout. Hey, we're going to be in the area. Want to give us a tour? And they're like, hell yeah, we'll give you a tour. We spent the whole day with these crazy Boy Scouts. They took us all over the park. They dug through their archives. They pulled out all these pictures of the house before it burned down. One guy was like, oh yeah, I remember hanging out there in the 1960s. I'm like, okay, what's this photograph? Is this a basement? Is this the second floor? Which room is this fireplace in? He answered all of our questions. I'm like, Sean, you need to come with me on every single freaking trip. So going through like oh my God, we had so much stuff from the Hartford Connecticut Historical Society, CHS, that I couldn't even read it all when I was there. And so I was just taking pictures of everything. So now that I'm actually like turning it into a book and reading through it, I'm like, Sean, are you like open for work right now? And so I'm just paying him to transcribe it for me, because I'm like, I cannot, every time I need to like re-verify a fact, sit down through like hundreds of photographs of old letters and try to remember where on earth this was. And so he's like slowly making his way through it. And now I can just open a Word doc and be like, command find keyword. And
Love it.
Oh, this is worth every cent I am paying you to do this. I can't.
That's awesome.
I can't handle this anymore.
That
That's
is
one headache I don't need.
That's
I
amazing.
make animation money now. What are you blowing it on? 18th century transcriptions, of course. Naturally.
Oh man. I feel like you naturally like kind of casually drop a level of dedication to your craft that very few people have. You're like, yeah, at one time I just went on this trip to go research this thing, and the rest of us are like Google image search. you're like going to the place and
I feel like I know these people. You know, and the cool thing, okay, I'm just gonna nerd out because this has been the last 6 weeks writing this book. The cool thing is they have like the Knowlton papers at the Connecticut Historical Society, and inside there is like these dudes who are like me, but like 100 and 150 years ago. And so they have gone on the original quest to find out the answers. And so going through, it's like rediscovering, like there's this one dude in there who was writing a biography on Thomas Knowlton. And then Thomas Knowlton's actual great nephew is like also collecting material. He's like trash talking him to this other biographer. He's like, the other biographer is like, so who's Charles Coffin? And he's like, yeah, he's kind of excitable. And I felt like the book that he wrote is like very romanticized and not to be trusted. And I'm like, Sean, we are Charles Coffin. We are excitable. I am not to be trusted. I am not impartial. That's why I'm writing a novel about history. But no, it's so fun to go and be like, oh, I'm not the first to tread here. But at the same time, I don't think the interest I have in these people is beyond like, what battle did he fight in?
Yeah.
Like the same thing over and over. Like, who was he? What was it like that your 1-year-old daughter died 2 years before the war? What was it? You were 15 years old. Your dad died in your arms. What did you do afterwards? Like that, you were a footnote in a book. Like, I don't want to spoil my book, but we found really cool stuff that I'm like, oh, no one even talks about this because it was about women in the family. And it's just been sitting in a dusty box in the Historical Society for 200 years or 100 years, and no one cares. And I'm like, I care. And so when you talk about death records, I'm like, that's on my list to do this week. I need to contact the Ashford like probate records, because when you go on the genealogy sites, if they don't have the photograph, they don't transcribe the cause of death. So I'm like, you're of a 1-year-old daughter who died. In the church record, cause of death is probably written there. It's not on the transcription. So how much do I have to pay for you to like scan this page in for me? Because there are like a couple key things I need more information on. But for me, that's where I get excited, because that's when I think people find inspiration from different places. Mm-hmm. When I find those little tiny kernels, they get me really excited, because then it like sparks something alive and it like chain reaction like in my brain. I feel like I always do better when there's a little bit of clay on the table instead of like coming at something from ground zero and trying to make something from scratch. So I think that's part of why like I gravitate to historical fiction, because there's already something there to play with. And then my job is kind of like to breathe life on it, you know, and make it come to life like the Blue Fairy, you know, and like, oh, it's one thing to read like an account of the Battle of Bunker Hill. It's an entirely different thing to make someone from the 21st century feel afraid and feel like, what would it be like to have my feet on the ground there? I think that's a very different skill set. And that's the one that I'm way more interested in.
Yeah. I'm so glad that there's people like you out there, because I care so little about memorizing dates and facts and whatever, but like people have always been people. And so the stories, the interactions, and the relationships, and that's where I was, that's where I'm really interested.
But,
what were you going to say, Josh?
Oh, I was just saying, like, I understand, because like I rarely team up with anyone to work on projects, and the script that I'm working on, like, that's going to be starting like after Thursday, which intimidates the hell out of me. But part of why I like wanted to do it was it's a story about it has a very strong female figure in history that there's a lack of this story having been told, and so that's really exciting. It's famous figures, but it's like this thing that, and this I can see the appeal, because it's like when you stumble on those things where you're like, how has no one like made this like a thing? Like it's an impeccable, like amazing story, and like no one's written about this. Like that's insane. It kind of feels like when you're doing illustration for like t-shirts or something, and you or graphic design, where you come up with that simple solution where you're like, somebody has to have done this before, and the fact that they didn't is like a driver or a motivator, and so like I definitely understand that, because like there is an appeal this early on, before I've like fully delved in. At this point, I've only done like sample pages, but the thing that's made me really interested in it is it's an exciting thing that it actually happened, and like being like almost feeling like you're in on the secret of that, and being able to kind of help translate that is really exciting. And I'm excited to kind of join in on that journey, because it just it's so inspiring to see. But it also seems like very similar to like animation or comics, where it's like, once I see that thing move, am I going to be like hooked into this weird industry? Like,
yes, you will. Yes, you will. I hope. I don't know. You might be going to strange graveyards and like lying on the graves of people that you feel like you know but never met. Like that might be in your future.
Yeah, or in my past. Who knows?
All right, you're already one of us.
But I love that. So are you doing it as a prose novel, or is this like a comic, or prose like a
novel? Not drawing it. I've always loved writing, and even when I was doing the Dreamer,
refreshing.
Yeah, even when I was doing the Dreamer, I would do like side stories.
Yeah.
And I would do those as prose, and they always had a much different flavor, because in comics you don't, you can use a thought bubble, but they're really out of vogue. And so stylistically it wasn't a choice I made, and so everything is external. And when you go into writing prose, all of a sudden you can explore that. And so it became a place for me to explore like all of these historical characters that are in my book, but like the Dreamer followed B's story, so everything had to be boiled down to what's relevant to her and what's relevant to like the story arc, and if it wasn't, then I had to leave it out. And so I would do these little side stories and put them on Patreon, or put them for sale on my website as a PDF, and I would do like a comic cover on them or whatever, some art, but just this additional stuff. And so this novel actually grew out of one of the stories I wrote. And then, my buddy Sean started doing his genealogy thing, and it blew my mind. And then that's when we just got like down the rabbit hole. And now I'm so far down the rabbit hole. It's that thing. It's like, who will tell this story if not me, right? Like, who's the next Charles Coffin who's going to come along? Like, is it going to be another 150 years before somebody cares enough to pick it up? I just feel like that's my motivating factor, is like, I love this family so much, and I want to tell their story. And so it's ride or die on me. So
that's so awesome.
I'm doing it.
That is so rad and inspiring. I think like it, out of curiosity, I just have this question, because it's like, I definitely, I have a lot of friends who've done animation, especially like done the animation circuit, where you're doing different, companies in LA.
Yeah. And
it's really inspiring and cool. But a lot of them, like, I'll meet and they'll be like aching to kind of work on their own thing. You're like in the polar opposite kind of scenario, where you're just like, I've done my own thing for a long time. Like, this is really fun to be a part of teams. Do you think there's ever a point where people find like a perfect balance between the two, or there's like kind of like a Zen state where you kind of have to be like sort of shifting in both to be content as an artist? That's my last question about like
this feels so magical to me, because I was so burned out. When I was burned out from comics, I mean, I was having like multiple anxiety attacks a week. Like I was in therapy, and my therapist is like, this line of work that you're in doesn't fit your personality type. Like, we need to shift you into someplace else. And it was like, I moved to LA and I had like maybe 1 or 2 panic attacks that first month and never again. It's like, oh, you were right. Like, I'm not good at like selling myself. And I hate that. It's like, it doesn't come naturally or anything. And so I think that's a big piece of me. Like, the hang up I have with posting on Instagram is like, I'm just so over that piece of the like self-promotion marketing piece of it. And I hadn't been able to find, like, I've made myself work on some boards or some like personal stuff here and there, but like I have not found that thing that truly sparked joy.
Yeah.
And I mean, it sounds kind of, I don't know if it sounds weird or not, but this is what happened. Anne Rice died. She was my inspiration when I was a teenager. Like, I was OG fangirl Anne Rice, like, watch Interview with a Vampire 100 times, cut my teeth writing Vampire Lestat fan fiction where me and my best friend get turned into vampires. Like, that was like my origin story. And when she passed away, it was like one of my friends just texted me. It was just like, knew that I liked her and was like, oh, Anne Rice is dead. I'm like, wait, what? And it really rocked me. And another one of my friends who was more understanding that maybe she should have broken that to me in a different way, was like, hey, I've never seen Interview with a Vampire. Let's watch it. And so she came over and we watched it. And I hadn't seen it in probably at least a decade or something. But it returned to me this like passion I had when I was a teenager. And I was just like in my dad's, like in the den in my parents' house, like sitting by the Christmas tree, just like up late every night, just writing this 80-page fanfic of like nonsense. But it was like, I remember that like connection and that drive. And going back and reading some of Anne Rice's novels as an adult, they don't connect to me in the same way they did when I was 16 years old.
Yeah.
But remembering that and how it spoke to me, I felt like I found a place that I could express myself. Like, I found this like story that really meant something, like the dark parts of myself I didn't know how to get out. Like, she put them all in there. And I just realized, like, I have so much anxiety around creating, but the thing that I create doesn't have to be everything to everyone. Like, Anne Rice had such a like robust career, and it was a very specific career.
Yeah.
You know? Like, and that I need to embrace that instead of me trying to just be like worried about every possible critique out there and every possible genre or whatever. Like, this person might not like it, so how do I fix it? It's like, no, I said I was kind of like talking about Anne Rice's histories and my husband when she died, I was kind of processing it and was like, yeah, like when her husband died, I remember that. And I remember how much it wrecked her. Like, I think the only person in the world she loved more than Stan Rice was Lestat, like the vampire Lestat. And I'm like, I think that's true. Like, she wrote him until the day she died, you know?
Yeah.
Like, he was the true great love of her life. And I think I gave myself permission to kind of like lean back into that and to just be a little bit corny and to just be like, my interest is kind of specific and it won't be everything for everyone, but I bet there is someone out there who will find these same things and find the same joy out of this story that I do. And I'm shifting gears and I'm going to tell this story for that person. I'm going to tell a story for Frederick Knowlton, pour one out on his grave, because I love the kid and I want the rest of the world to love him as much as I do.
That's perfect though. That's really exciting. Did Cory just disappear?
Yeah, he just texted. He said he had to cut out real quick, but he'll be back.
Okay.
He just had an emergency.
We should all just be done by the time he comes back, and then he'll come back and he'll be like,
I know, he'll be like, what happened?
Hey.
Where did everybody go? I think that's inspiring though, and like that's kind of where I've arrived. Not at the same point. And I think you've had far more success in your career, obviously. But like for me, I had freelanced and done illustration, got known for like my own style and stuff for like 15 years. And I just got really burnt out on that. And realized like I just wanted to do a lot of stuff that wasn't like necessarily like commercially viable.
Yeah.
And it was like, and so I was like, I'd rather have like a steady thing and then like have the pay covered so that I can kind of focus on the art stuff. It's just art. Like, just straight up like art for art's sake, which I used to be really critical of. But now I'm like all about, and I think like what you're talking about kind of touches on that, where it's like, you know, I think telling your story is the important part in whatever form you do it. And as long as you have that kind of going, and then you're also able to like create stories in some way or another, like for a living, I think that's like, that sounds like, I don't know. I mean, I still haven't met anyone who's found the perfect balance, but I feel like that's kind of closer to where it works.
Yeah, I think it's definitely sorry. I was just going to say, I think it's definitely a journey because, you know, anyone that's been doing this for a long time, I mean, you'll be totally passionate about one thing, and then all of a sudden, you know, you kind of make a shift. Like I remember when I first started doing artwork, it was like, you know, it was all commercial. You know, it's like, no, I'm not even going to put my pencil to paper unless somebody's paying me to do this. And then eventually it was like, now I've kind of done a 180 where it's like, no, I'm going to create stuff. I'm going to put it out there and find an audience for it. And, you know, I went through the same thing. I was doing the same thing with the marketing and all that. And I don't particularly care to do that. And then, so I, you know, started working for a game studio or whatever. And then, you know, but always doing your stuff on the side. And so I think it's just a journey. I mean, but you take whatever you've done, you know, previously, you take that into what you're doing now. I mean, just like the transition from comics to storyboards, and so it's just interesting to see where people are at one point in their career and how they kind of shift to a different area.
And I'm looking forward to this book. Like, I'm really excited about this book. Like, I like Invincible and stuff, but like, to me, I want to see your book. And like, I think that to me is really exciting that you're working on it and you're in the process of like the inspiration, kind of chasing that.
This is the magic hour you got. I'm like literally just about to write the midpoint. So I'm like halfway there.
Yeah.
Right in the throes of it.
Yeah. So are we being your resistance right now in like the war of art kind of scenario?
I know. I was like all working on a scene tonight, like right up until the last minute. I was literally reading like an 1864 biography to refresh myself on some fun facts. So I was like, all right, when I get off this call, I'll write that scene. But no, I think that, you know, to talk about that, for me, and I have friends who are still in independent comics. Like I left and they're still there, and I've tried to talk some of them into like coming into animation and seeing the light, and they're perfectly happy. And I think it's just like per person. And for me, you know, like I'm House Slytherin. Like there is a ambitious element to me where I am not gonna be content just sitting alone. Like I have I'm too big for myself, right? And so there's something in me that was like not content with like a moderately successful like animation career, and so or comic book career, you know. And so it took the joy out of it. I mean, I'm literally asking questions myself, like if my husband died, how do I take care of myself? Like that kind of like pressure. Like yes, it's a gift that he's given me that we can like my comics income is supplemental, but you know, when I'm looking at my own life, like I want to be able to stand on my own 2 feet. So there's something that just like from a mental health perspective of like, you know, I make a good, solid, livable wage.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
no, and
it takes the pressure off the other stuff.
Yeah,
and
it's huge.
For me, that's really key. Yeah.
That's one thing that I think a lot of people don't appreciate as they're trying to get into stuff. It's like if you love it and you don't have to make money off of it because you're able to earn in another way, then you can just enjoy it.
Exactly.
Like you can just do it because you like it. And a lot of people will ask me, they'll be like, oh, you know, what do you want to happen with this book that you just finished? Or what do you want to happen with this animation or whatever? And I'm like, I don't care, because I don't need it to do anything. It did its thing when I made it. And if people enjoy it, they enjoy it. And if not, it's okay, because I'm making the next thing. And I have a day job that covers all of my worry and anxiety and bills and expenses. And so I don't have to make this thing that I love do anything other than be a thing that I love.
And for me, the making of the thing is the magic.
Yeah.
Right.
When it's done and you go into the refining and the publishing and all of that, it's not magic anymore. It's like
there's one moment that's magic, which is when you finally get like that printed copy and you have that like brief moment of like the reality of it.
Yes.
And then it's just a fleeting chase for that.
It feels like it's going to be so big.
Yeah, it never is.
It's going to be so monumentous, but then you're literally like at your house and then you open a box of books and then like you're still at your house. Like it's not what you think it is, right? You're like not at a convention. It's like unveiling and there's the crowds and we're all going to read it together. It's like, I guess someone maybe went out and bought it today and like, maybe they're sitting at home and their recliner reading it. Like, but I had the high of making web comics, right? Like, I had comments and readers in real time. And so then the book comes out and you're like, crickets, like, oh, this is not as much fun.
Yeah.
But I do want to say something about animation. Like, as we're talking about this dichotomy between like passion projects and independent comics versus studio work for hire, whatever.
Yeah.
I have been surprised and delighted by how much of myself is in the work that I do in animation. And I wasn't anticipating that. Like I was thinking of it, you know, I kind of had this false like dichotomy in my head of like, either I make creative work for myself or I sell out and go work for the man. And it's like, oh, it's not, because when I get a handout, it's words on a page. Literally, that's all it is. It's a script. And when it becomes a thing that someone is watching, they are watching the thing that I invented out of nothing. And if that handout had gone to a different board artist, that scene would look and feel entirely different. And it's not wrong. It's just that we all have our own creative fingerprints. And so, like, I think I've done the best work of my life on Magic the Gathering. I'm really excited for when that show comes out.
Ooh, that's exciting.
They gave me some really sweet scenes, and I felt like they were kind of hands off on me, but I was at a point in my career where I was ready for that. You know, if it had been earlier in my career, I would have been like sink or swim, you know, and I probably would have floundered about, but I had enough experience that I really felt like with that hands off kind of director that I worked with, like actually allowed me to thrive. And so it's like I finally found as a board artist, like my own voice and my own way of like doing things. So I'm excited for when I start back on the next project and kind of like bringing that with me to do that. But yeah, I was fortunate that when I interviewed for that job, Adu Padden, who was supervising director, like as a final like tack on to the interview question was like, oh, by the way, what kind of like people do you like to work with? Like what kind of team do you like? And I was like, well, you know, I like working with collaborative directors who like really are open to you bringing something to the table. Like I've also worked with directors who are very specific, like this is what I want. And so you're kind of like carrying out their vision or their reboarding a lot of your stuff. I was like, I like where I feel like I have ownership. And he assigned me to Patrick Archibald's team. And Patrick was wonderful because he, you know, his notes were great. They always made my scenes better, but he really was just like fly little bird, you know, like fun with it. And so that was kind of a special show for me to work on.
I think I've made that tip on here before where when I started as an art director, because I had like freelance for a long time, I didn't do the studio system for like, you know, 15 years or something. So when I finally was like, okay, I'm going to take an art director gig, I was like really honest in my interview. And I remember, you know, it was like one of the first job interviews where they're like, what's your weakness? And you're not like, oh, I just work too hard, you know, that kind of thing. I was like, my weakness is if I'm micromanaged, I get really pissed off. And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, I hate micromanagement. And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, so like, what's your management? Like what style and stuff? And I was like, as long as I'm not being micromanaged. And I was like, I don't mean micromanagement like, you know, people who don't want to work mean micromanagement. I mean, like, just let me do my job. And as long as I'm doing my job, like, trust that I'll do my job.
Right.
And what's weird is I'm in a position where I get that. And it's awesome. Like, that's the one thing I like, you know. And also because I said that in my interview, if that ever isn't the case, I could be like, look, I've been straightforward. Like for years.
You knew what you got.
I hate micromanagement. But what's great is like when you're given trust, you know, it's depending because like, again, if I didn't have like all those years in the trenches learning and absorbing and stuff like that, I wouldn't really thrive in that kind of scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And I know enough to like know when to reach out for help now.
Yeah.
Whereas like I think early on you might think but you're kind of screwed. Like so it's like, yeah, anyhow, my point is I really relate to what you're talking about. I also think like it's possible to have your creative fulfillment from both. And I think that's kind of your ideal scenario where you're getting creatively fulfilled with a team and you're getting pieces of that great like tapestry. Like it's almost like building a cathedral, right? Like you're not going to build the whole thing yourself, right? Yeah. And then you also have those moments where you get to build like the little house that's yours. And it's like kind of finding that balance between the two. I think it sounds like you're well on the road to that. And that's really exciting. And also I'm glad you were able to quit comics. It'll be interesting to see if you can stick with it.
I know.
Because I know a lot of, I always joke on the show that comics are like a drug habit. That when you're in it, you're trying to peddle it on everyone, which I will easily do. I'm still trying to push Cory to do graphic novels.
You keep trying to push me to do autobiographic novels. It's a very specific push.
That is very specific.
It doesn't have to be autobio, man. I still think that whole narrative, the mythological storyline needs to be a full graphic novel. But anyhow.
Everything you write is autobiographical. I just don't use my own names or my own family's names. I just assign them to people who died 200 years ago. But change the names. You're going to know everything about me you ever wanted to.
I'd be pretty scared if that were true for me, because that would be pretty dark.
Well, I mean, I do feel like what I write is kind of dark. Talking about the Earpers, Emily Andres, the showrunner for Winona Earp, she did a tweet recently that made me think. It was like, what is the one thing that you always write about? And I was thinking about it. I was like, I think it's grief for me. Like I get stuck in writing about grief. Like I had just like a very traumatic, my grandpa died when I was 10. Like it was my first experience with death, and it like scarred me, but I never knew how to process it. And my family didn't talk about it. And then it was just done. And I think that it was this, like, I didn't have like another major funeral until I was a young adult. And I spent 3 hours in the car crying in anticipation of having to walk into a funeral home after having run out of one 13 years earlier.
Yeah.
I think that there's this like unresolved thing in me. And then like going through new, fresh levels of grief as an adult, and then now working through them and processing them, I think it comes out in my work. So I don't know. Darkness, I don't know. But I also love Anne Rice, so that shouldn't surprise you.
No,
Anne Rice is amazing. And also darkness is what we all surround. It's funny, the happiest stuff. Like speaking of like CG stuff that was very effective, that I think impacted most animators, right? It's like that first 10-minute sequence in Up when like the family, like when the couple is like saving their coins in the piggy bank. It's like that is the darkest, like that is delving into darkness on a level that like hardcore, like super dark stories rarely tread,
Oh yeah.
So, yeah. You gotta enjoy the darkness. Cory gets into the darkness too.
No, I'm saying, I mean, if I were to boil down the stuff that I do, I think everybody would go a different direction than what I'm about to say. But if I were to boil it down, I think it would be the fear of the loss of individuality. And I think that's a major theme in my life and a lot of my work. It happens to be currently, just in the last year or two, couched in like big tech taking over and doing everything, but that's always been what I've been talking about.
But it's a theme of 1984. I mean, it's a solid theme.
Yeah,
Brave New World. You got
Brave New World. Yeah.
And so I mean that's most of the stuff I end up doing. But I mean, the interesting thing for me is like I think there's a lot of truth in the whole like everything we do is autobiographical. Like I have to tell people who've like seen my work but never met me, like I feel like I want to tell them like I'm actually a pretty optimistic person and I'm a nice person and I don't want all
Cory, imagine writing. So I write like confessional autobio that talks about like suicidal ideation from like a decade ago.
Right.
And I have to pitch this at cons to people. So they come to my booth and I'm like, hi, here's a book about when I felt suicidal. Like it's super awkward because I'm like, I have a kid. I have like a house. Like
you almost want to tell them like, hey, I'm okay.
Yeah,
This book
like,
is about when I wasn't okay.
Just put a sticker on the cover of every book.
Yeah,
I'm okay now.
It's
Right.
so hard to craft a pitch for that doesn't make people feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I'm not trying to play sympathy. I like touching on topics that are like those, kind of like you were talking about, Laura, where it's like you're hitting on those topics of like loss and like the things people are uncomfortable addressing or talking about. Like I think so yeah, that's a constant recurring theme in my work, where it's like it's about grief, loss, and sort of mental illness that I think is like way more present than people admit. Like I talk about panic disorder really openly in my comic too, because I don't think people talk about that often.
Yeah.
But I think like at least in art, like I know tons of people who have that and have found ways to kind of navigate, the weird dark clouds we all deal with. But like for me, those are such fun areas to lean into, but it's also hard to pitch because you're like, I'm not necessarily like a dark person. Like I really dig Monty Python and like stupid, wonderful humor. And I just, that's what I'm drawn to write. Scott, you write about some darkness too. There's some darkness in Young and the Dead, man.
I don't know how dark my stuff is. I mean, everyone had that phase in the 90s, I think.
It was the 90s.
Yeah, you got to make the most violent comic in the world, and then I don't know.
I mean, everyone is dead in your comic, so that's got to.
Well, yeah, but it's an adventure. It's it's kids versus zombies, so I mean, it's not too serious.
We're all envious. We're all envious, Scott. That sounds fun.
It does sound fun.
All right, before we jump into another topic and start pushing 2 hours, let's wrap.
Sounds good.
We'd love to have you back on anytime you want, Laura.
This was so fun.
Yeah, there's so many times I wanted to chime in, but I didn't get the opportunity. So I'd definitely love to have you back on and everything. So the whole time you're talking about your book, and I won't get too much into this, but my girlfriend also writes historical fiction. She's working on a Civil War novel right now. So just making the connections and everything like that. So
I was working on a Civil War graphic novel back when I was still in comics that was in conjunction with a TV show that was going to come out. And then the TV show never came out. And I asked the producer, like, hey, can we still pitch this? And he was like, yeah, no. And so I have this like beautiful Civil War story about, like this real historical, like unknown soldier and fleshing out what the backstory was there. And it'll just exist in my brain.
Is it a real person? Because I feel like they can't claim the right to that.
No, they can't claim the right to that per se, but he did help me develop it. And so, yeah. So.
Yeah, that's I think what they call development hell.
It is indeed.
Yeah. Who knows though? Like this is the weird thing. Every once in a while those things get scooped up and like somehow have a second life. So
that's true. Maybe I'll come back to it. But that's really cool for her. Now I'm gonna go over a rabbit trail, but I hope she watched Dickinson. The whole last season, the final season is all about the Civil War, and there's some just like really, really beautiful things.
What is this?
Dickinson. It's about Emily Dickinson.
Emily Dickinson, I assume. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and it was 3 seasons on Apple Plus.
Okay.
Which we don't have, but I'll definitely mention it.
Yeah, if she hasn't already seen her, get her hooked on it.
Okay, that remind me to tell you who the things about when we're off air, because that somehow connects a little bit.
Yeah, hang out a couple minutes here. So, okay, so before we go, open invitation whenever you feel like talking for a couple hours. We'd love to have you on. But yeah, so let's round up things. Laura, where can people find your stuff? If people are like really excited about this whole conversation, what's the best thing that they can do for you?
Follow me on Twitter, and if I tweet about stuff, give me a retweet or a comment to get that tweet in front of other people's eyes. That's number one. Or if you're in animation and you're looking for an animation director, I'm like ready to take that step. So, you can call me.
That's great. And Josh, where can we find your stuff?
JoshuaKemble.com. Order my first graphic novel, 2 stories. Ask your local comic shop to order it, or you can get it on Amazon. And then also pre-order Jacob's Apartment, my graphic novel coming out in May of this year. And pre-orders help a lot. As Lora or anyone in indie comics can let you know, it's amazing like what one or two people going to a bookstore, like Jacob's, like just go into your local like Barnes and Noble or indie bookshop, Vroman's, if you're near it, please Vroman's. But like, you know, ask for them to order the book. It makes a massive difference. So
cool. And you can find my stuff at corykerr.com. If you click on what's new, then you'll see some of the newer animations and things. I think all of this stuff I've done is out of the festival circuit now. So I think it's all available to see, pretty sure. So you can check that stuff out. And Instagram, I'll still be there until I say I'm not. So you can go there. I'm on Twitter sometimes as well. And then you're on my YouTube channel. So if somehow you got here and you're interested in this type of stuff and are not currently following me, then follow me. And then Lora, just thanks for coming on. This is really awesome. I was excited to have you. And,
it was a fun night. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, that was amazing.
Scott, what do we do? Where can we find you? And what do we do if we want to figure out whose channel?
Yeah. So you can find my stuff at serkworks.com. We alluded to it earlier, but if you're into kids fighting zombies, my comic book series, Young and the Dead, it's like Goonies meets Night of the Living Dead. So a bunch of 80s nostalgia, kids fighting zombies, super fun. So definitely check that out. And I think there's probably a link to join our mailing list right now. We're kind of on hiatus sending that newsletter out. But we're going to switch over to a new mails company or whatever. But still sign up, because once we make that switch, you'll be on the mailing list and everything. And basically what that will do is that will notify you, when we're going to go live with one of these episodes. We don't spam you or anything like that, because it does get confusing, because it rotates from Cory's channel to my channel to Josh's channel. And you never know, we may do it usually on a Thursday, we may do it on a Wednesday or whatever, but just so you know exactly when we're going to go live, because YouTube doesn't always notify people. Still join that mailing list, and once we get back into the habit of sending out those notifications, you'll be notified.
All right. Okay, we'll see everybody next week.